My father stood there while my cousin beat me bloody in my own army quarters. He didn't lift a hand. He didn't even blink. And later, he signed the report that called me unstable. That moment shattered me. All my life, I thought the uniform would finally earn his respect. Instead, it became the weapon he used to erase me. But what they didn't know is that silence can turn into fire. And once I found my voice, there was no stopping it. Do you want to know what happens when a soldier refuses to stay invisible? I still remember the sting of that night, as if it branded itself into my bones. For years, I believed wearing the uniform would change everything. That once I proved myself on the battlefield, my father would finally see me, not as some fragile daughter, not as a shadow standing behind my cousin Mark, but as a soldier. His soldier. That illusion shattered during the awards ceremony. The hall smelled of brass polish and wood varnish, the kind of scent you notice only when your chest is already tight. I'd rehearsed my short speech for weeks, just a simple thank you to my team. When they called my name, the applause echoed, my heart hammering with a mix of pride and nerves. I stepped forward, notes trembling in my hand. Before I could speak, my father, Colonel Richard Carter, stood. His voice, heavy and commanding, cut through the room. "We should remember the sacrifices of men like Mark Thorne," he declared, gesturing toward my cousin sitting smug in the front row. The crowd clapped louder than they had for me, louder than they ever had for me. My father didn't even glance at me. He turned me into a placeholder, a warm-up act before his real soldier was praised. My smile was thin, brittle. I stepped back, outwardly calm, but inside my chest hollowed out. I had known this sting before at school competitions, when my medals were cute, but Mark's trophies made him a hero. At family barbecues where I stood in uniform, but someone always muttered, "Not bad for a girl." When the ceremony ended, I slipped away. Nobody noticed. They were too busy patting Mark's back and clasping my father's hand. My shoes echoed against the concrete as I walked alone across the base. My barracks room felt suffocating. I set my cap on the desk, hung my jacket carefully, as if the ribbons were made of glass. Sitting on the bed, I opened my journal, a habit I carried from deployments. Writing steadied me. I scribbled about the hollow applause, my father's words, the way my voice had been swallowed whole. That's when it came. A violent crash rattled the window. My door slammed open. Mark stormed in, reeking of whiskey, eyes bloodshot. "You think you deserve that uniform more than me?" he roared. I stood, heart pounding. "You need to leave, Mark. Now." He laughed, a harsh bark. "You embarrassed the family. You've always been a fraud." His fist landed on my shoulder, slamming me into the desk. Pain shot down my arm, my journal scattering. Another blow smashed into my ribs. My vision blurred, and then, in the doorway, I saw him. My father, arms crossed, watching. He didn't move. He didn't shout. He didn't blink. "Dad," my voice cracked. Mark's knee drove into my side. My legs buckled. The silence from my father burned deeper than the bruises. And that's when I knew this wasn't just about Mark. It was about all of them. I lay curled on the floor, ribs screaming with every shallow breath. Mark's hand fisted in my hair, yanking my head up. His spit hit my cheek as he snarled, "Say or nothing, say it!" I searched the doorway, desperate for my father's eyes to soften, for his arms to move, for anything. But Colonel Richard Carter stood there like a stone statue. No emotion, no humanity, just cold silence. That silence cut deeper than Mark's fists. Through the blur, my hand crawled toward the green emergency radio on the nightstand. I pressed the code switch 3 times. Beep, beep, beep. The signal raced out across the base. Mark didn't notice. He was too busy screaming. "Nobody will believe you, not the army, not Dad, not anyone." But then, in the distance, I heard it, the rising wail of military police sirens. Mark froze, his eyes darted. This isn't over. He shoved me down, bolted past my father. My father stepped aside, letting him pass. No words, no resistance, just a quiet betrayal. Moments later, MPs rushed in, voices sharp and urgent. "Soldier down! Get her stable, call medics." Hands lifted me, strapped me onto a stretcher. The fluorescent lights above blurred into streaks. I didn't close my eyes because of pain, I closed them because of disbelief. My father had seen everything, and he turned away. When I woke in the infirmary, the air smelled like antiseptic. My arm was in a sling, ribs wrapped so tight every breath hurt. A nurse, Linda Hayes, gave me a soft smile, one that knew too much. She placed a sealed envelope on the tray beside me. "From command," she said gently. I tore it open. My stomach dropped. Notice of temporary suspension, pending psychological evaluation. Reason: emotional instability, questionable conduct. At the bottom, under supporting statements, my father's signature. My hands shook. He hadn't just stood by, he had written me into the lie. Hours later, my phone buzzed. A message preview from Jessica, my cousin. A screenshot from the family group chat I hadn't been part of in years. She always had a flair for drama. Maybe she hit herself. Unstable, just like her mother. And then, my father's thumbs up emoji. Not a sentence, just a symbol. Cold confirmation that he'd never believed me. I pressed his name on my screen. The line rang once. I hung up before he answered. Whatever part of me still hoped for an excuse, even a pathetic one, died right there. I stared at the ceiling, ribs aching, but the pain inside me was worse. That was the moment I realized they didn't just erase me from ceremonies, they wanted to erase me entirely. But I wasn't going to let them. Not this time. The hospital lights hummed above me, sterile and unfeeling. I lay there with bandages wrapping my ribs so tightly I could barely breathe. But the ache in my body wasn't the worst part, it was the echo of silence. My father's silence. His signature, carved into that suspension letter, was like a knife twisted in my chest. Nurse Linda came back, adjusting my IV. Her eyes lingered on me, softer than most. "You're quiet," she said gently. "Sure you don't want to talk to someone?" I forced a bitter smile. "I don't need a therapist. I need a record that doesn't get rewritten." She paused, lips pressed tight. "That's fair." Then she added, "If you change your mind, the chaplain comes Tuesdays." Her kindness was a crack of light in a dark room, but I knew better. Talking wouldn't save me, proof would. That night, as the halls dimmed, I stared at the shadows stretching across the floor. Memories I'd buried came rushing back. The model airplane I built at 10, desperate for Dad's approval, only for him to hand it to Mark and say, "Show her how it's done." The drill team trophy in 8th grade I never told anyone about. The countless medals that collected dust, while Mark's lesser victories earned barbecues and speeches. Patterns, always the same. But overseas, I'd seen something different. During a deployment, Mark once panicked under fire, leaving 2 new recruits stranded. I'd stepped in, stabilized them, called the medevac, held the line. The report should have made the truth clear. Instead, command edited it down. My name vanished. Mark was reassigned quietly, his reputation polished, mine erased. Sitting in that hospital bed, I realized they'd been rewriting my story my whole life, and now they wanted me gone completely. My breath hitched, ribs protesting, as I whispered to myself, "Not anymore." The next morning, I forced myself out of bed, sling digging into my shoulder. I walked slowly down the hall, ignoring the stairs. Some avoided my eyes, others whispered too loudly. They weren't looking at me like a victim. They were looking at me like I was dangerous. That was how I knew the family's version was already spreading. But I wasn't about to disappear. Not this time. Later that day, in the base commons, I sat with a lukewarm coffee, tapping my fingers against the cup, mind racing. Then someone approached quietly, Private Alex Miller, young, polite, barely 20. He slipped a flash drive onto the table. "You didn't get this from me," he whispered, eyes darting. I froze. "What is it?" "Just listen when you're alone." And then he walked off like nothing happened. My heart pounded. My ribs ached. But for the first time since that night, something shifted. Maybe I wasn't as alone as they wanted me to believe. That night, back in my quarters, I sat on the edge of the bed with the lights low. My ribs throbbed beneath the bandages, every breath sharp. My fingers trembled as I slid the flash drive into my tablet. For a second, I almost couldn't do it. What if it was nothing? Or worse, what if it confirmed everything? The file crackled with static. Then a voice. Mark, you don't get to wear that uniform like it means something. His words dripped with venom. Then another voice followed, calm, cold, unmistakable. My father, just finish this. She needs to be put in her place. I froze. My chest tightened so hard it hurt more than the broken ribs. His tone wasn't raised, not angry, just casual, like he was ordering coffee. For a moment, I wanted to hurl the tablet across the room, scream until my lungs tore, but instead I sat still and listened. Every word carved deeper into me. When it ended, the silence in the room was louder than the recording itself. I backed it up. Twice. 3 times. 1 copy to the cloud, another encrypted. If they wanted to erase me, they would have to erase every trace. The next day, a secure message popped up on my base account. Meet me, off base, Southgate Cafe, Daniel Brooks. Captain Brooks wasn't the type to send casual notes. My stomach twisted, but I went. The cafe was small, the kind where locals pretended not to notice soldiers. Daniel sat with a bitter black coffee, eyes heavy. He didn't bother with small talk. They want this wrapped up quietly, he said flatly. Personal dispute, no charges, no noise, orders from above. I let out a shaky laugh. So Mark gets to walk and I get stamped unstable? His jaw tightened. They told me to keep my mouth shut. I won't. Something inside me shifted. An ally. One who wasn't afraid. Later that night, I tore through boxes I hadn't touched. In years, journals, field notes, deployment logs. Every time my victories were buried, every time Mark's failures got polished, I cataloged them. I started building a map. If they wanted to destroy me, I'd make sure the truth survived even if I didn't. By dawn, I had a plan. An encrypted email draft, no recipient yet, but attached were files. The audio, the suppressed report, a spreadsheet of every date and incident I documented. At the top I typed, if you're reading this, it means they silenced me. Start here. My hand hovered. For the first time in my life, I wasn't writing for validation. I was writing for war. And deep down, I knew they wouldn't sit quietly while I gathered ammo. They'd strike back. It didn't take long for their counterattack to begin. Not fists this time, something far more dangerous. The first blow came through the television. I had just returned from a base conference, still in uniform, heels dangling in my hand, ribs aching under the bandages. The anchor's voice made me look up. Accusations made anonymously, threatening decorated military personnel. And then his face. Mark. Sitting in a television studio, clean-shaven, polished, the picture of calm. Civilian clothes, no uniform, just enough to look trustworthy. I won't speculate, he said smoothly, eyes on the camera. But it's dangerous when personal vendettas bleed into official records. Real soldiers get hurt. The host nodded sympathetically. There are always 2 sides. Yes, Mark agreed, but the louder side isn't always the honest one. My jaw locked. He hadn't said my name. He didn't need to. Every soldier watching knew exactly who he meant. They wanted me branded unstable, bitter, unfit. I didn't throw the remote. I didn't scream. I turned the television off, sat in silence, and began typing. Not my story, theirs. Women I had met over deployments, nurses, medics, intelligence officers, wives of soldiers, all with scars of their own, all silenced in whispers. I sanitized names and ranks, altered dates just enough to protect them. Each story of intimidation, gaslighting, paperwork, errors, promotions blocked, injuries miswritten, it formed a pattern. And at the end I added mine. Clean, precise, no adjectives, no bitterness, just data, dates, times, field notes. I sent the file to a journalist I'd met overseas, someone I trusted, Sarah Whitman, sharp-eyed, soft-voiced, the kind who listened more than she talked. My message was simple. Read this. Decide for yourself. Oh. Her reply came an hour later. This is bigger than you think. The next morning, the story ran quietly on a military watchdog site. Not flashy, not viral, just a tremor. But tremors spread. Soon, 2 more women added stories in the comments. Then 5. Then it reached a private forum for female veterans. The conversation had begun, and something shifted on base. At the chow hall, a soldier I barely knew nodded at me. In the hallway, a junior officer stopped mid-sentence when I passed not with mockery, but with thought. Not everyone believed me, but not everyone believed them anymore either. That afternoon, I walked past the Hall of Commendations and froze. There, framed in gold trim, was Mark's smug face, standing before a general, receiving a medal I recognized instantly. My medal. Extraordinary triage under hostile fire. Syria, 2019. The same mission where I dragged 2 men through blood-soaked gravel with torn knuckles and sleepless eyes while Mark had panicked and vanished. The same mission that nearly cost me the use of my wrist. And now, it was his story, his glory. I marched straight to the archive office. The young corporal on duty hesitated, but eventually handed me the file. Thin, too thin. No mention of my name. No triage notes. At the bottom, signed off by Colonel Richard Carter. My father had erased me. Again. But this time, I had something he didn't know existed. The flash drive. His voice. She needs to be put in her place. The proof was already in my hands. And soon the world would hear it. The memorial garden behind the base chapel was quiet that evening, the air thick with the smell of cut grass and fading sunlight. A small cluster of soldiers stood in hushed groups, holding plastic cups of punch. And there he was, Mark standing tall near a marble bench, wearing the same rehearsed posture he always did in photos, like he'd memorized it from a manual. I walked straight up to him. My ribs still ached under the bandages, but anger carried me forward. "You know," I said softly, "the problem with stealing what doesn't belong to you is you never know how to carry it." He smirked, leaning closer. "Still making everything about yourself? You dragged 2 guys a few feet through the dirt. I commanded the situation. That's why my name is on the wall." I tilted my head. "Funny, I remember you hiding behind a Humvee." His eyes narrowed, but he whispered, "History is written by whoever tells the story first, and I told it." And 80. I leaned closer, my voice low, steady. "You can lie to the world, but you and I both know who saved those men. And so does Dad." He scoffed. "No one remembers what they don't see." I locked eyes with him. "You just did." For a second, his mask slipped. I turned and walked away, leaving him in the shadows of his own stolen glory. That night, I pulled out my tablet and recorded a message. My voice was even stripped of emotion. To Colonel Richard Carter and Staff Sergeant Mark Thorne, I won't stay quiet anymore. I won't rewrite my history so you can feel comfortable. If you come for me again, bring a lawyer. Attached were copies of the altered commendation reports, photos of my injuries, and the audio of my father's voice giving Mark permission to break me. I sent it through a secure channel. Seconds later, the message showed, "Read, no reply, none needed." The next evening, the tremor became an earthquake. Sarah Whitman, the reporter I trusted, called. "We're going national with this," she said. "But Emily, they'll come after you harder." I laughed, bitter but clear. "Let them. I've been under attack my whole life. This time, I'm ready." The broadcast hit during the evening news cycle, right between local sports and weather. Headlines rolled across the screen. "Decorated soldier accused of assault. Records under scrutiny. Amble." For the first time, Mark's name was tied to mine in public, not as the family hero, but as the aggressor. The audio clip aired. My father's calm voice played across national television. The base cafeteria went silent. Phones buzzed. Soldiers stared at the screen. The silence that once suffocated me had become my weapon. The following morning, MPs escorted Mark off base in handcuffs. My father's career froze under review. And me? For the first time, heads turned when I walked by, not with ridicule, but with respect, or at least hesitation. The underdog was no longer invisible, and the fight was just beginning. The courtroom was colder than any deployment tent I'd ever slept in. Reporters whispered from the back rows, their pens scratching against notepads as though my life was a headline to be consumed. My hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the aftershock of months of battle, not with bullets, but with lies. When the verdict came, the air shifted. Staff Sergeant Mark Thorne guilty on all counts: aggravated assault, conspiracy, falsification of records. 15 years. No parole recommended. A murmur rippled through the room. Mark's face drained of its usual smugness, his jaw tight as MPs cuffed him. His eyes flicked to me once, full of hate, but I didn't flinch. Then came my father. Colonel Richard Carter sat motionless, his eyes lowered, his uniform stripped of the authority it once commanded. No protest, no defense. Just silence, the same silence he used to weaponize against me. Only this time, it condemned him. I didn't watch them leave. I didn't need to. My fight wasn't about watching them fall. It was about reclaiming what they stole. Weeks later, in my small apartment outside Fayetteville, I unpacked the last of my mother's things. At the bottom of the box was an envelope in her handwriting. "Your voice is your inheritance, Emily. Speak where I could not." I cried then, not from pain, not from grief, but because for the first time, I felt whole. 6 months after the trial, I stood at the local Veterans Center, leading a circle of women in uniform and out. No ranks, no titles, just voices. We called it Bravo Echo, our quiet code for being heard. A young soldier's wife whispered, "My dad always said, speaking out ruins families." I looked her in the eye. Number people who hurt others ruin families. Speaking out saves them. Outside, a Memorial Day parade marched by. Children waved flags, a brass band played, and I stood quietly among the crowd. Not erased, not invisible. I wasn't fighting to be remembered as someone's daughter or cousin anymore. I was fighting to live as myself. Because silence had once broken me. Now, it was the weapon I forged into justice. And justice, I realized, was only the beginning. Some betrayals cut deeper than any battlefield wound. For me, it wasn't the broken ribs or the bruises that almost silenced me. It was my father's refusal to see me, to believe me, to stand for me. But in the end, the silence that once destroyed me became the weapon that saved me. Justice didn't feel like triumph. It felt like steady ground, like breathing freely after years of suffocation. Mark lost his freedom. My father lost his honor. And I gained something more valuable than medals or applause. I gained my own voice. Now, every time I lead a group at the Veterans Center, I see what my mother meant when she wrote, "Your voice is your inheritance." Because speaking the truth doesn't just save yourself, it saves the ones who come after you. So I'll ask you this. Have you ever been erased, made invisible in your own family, your own life? What would you have done in my place? If this story struck something inside you, subscribe for more revenge stories that matter, because silence ends here.